Hello! So I woke up, found this video, saw some people's statements, seems to be like a bit of a meta video here by Game Theory, and I decided I'll watch it, so here we go. Not gonna spend much on this, let's just get right into it.
What's up with FNAF in 2026? Since the release of Secret of the Mimic, I've noticed a trend within FNAF YouTube that says a lot about the state of the franchise and why its audience feels the way it does.
Well, let's see.
Hello Internet!
Mr. Tom.
Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's actually kinda starting to miss that creepy old bear. It's been over a year since Secret of the Mimic, 8 months since the second movie, and then basically nothing. There's been no new games, no new books. The closest we got was Scott jumping into Dorco's live stream and telling us about him working on a
Until recently, you know, they kind of said something.
5 Laps was supposed to come out this year,
yeah.
but we heard nothing about it. We didn't even get any DLC from Steelwool. Instead, they just shared us these teasers, and trust me, we'll get to that. Those teasers did end up announcing Security Breach 2, and we got an announcement
they're pretty hype, I think,
about FNAF World 2. But the point is, it's been a fairly dry spell for FNAF recently in the physical things department, and it's the largest we've had in years.
Yeah, but sometimes, every once in a while, you gotta have that little dry period so that people, you know, behind the scenes can actually work on things and doesn't become slopified and all that, you know? And God knows FNAF has been kind of lower reputation recently for some reason, so...
Usually we could fill the void with books or just some constant new discoveries from...
But also Scott did say he didn't want to like oversaturate the market. That was specifically when it comes to the TV show. But you get the point. He doesn't want to overdo it and constantly pump things out.
Massive environments like we saw with Security Breach, but not this time. And that's done something very interesting. For the first time, FNAF theorists have nothing to really talk about, which has left some actually a little worried. A big part of theorizing is about looking forward, trying to figure out what the story is so that we can figure out what comes next. I mean, just look at the amount of predictions that I did on Secret of the Mimic. But with nothing new to talk about, there's nothing new to work with. Instead, we're just left with the story that exists right now, and that has done something really strange. As I've been keeping up with the theorists from across the YouTube space, I noticed that the new videos they were releasing almost all had a similar theme. What do you notice about this video? What about this one?
I don't know.
This one? What about all of these? What do they all have in common? They're all focused on the Afton era of games. From F1 through to Ultimate Custom.
Sure, but you know, that's because we never fully solved that era, and we're trying, since the new stuff still kind of mentions and talks about the old era, we're still, you know, going back, trying to solve things, because we never really solved it.
And this isn't just me pointing fingers. My first FNAF theory of this year was a thought experiment about whether there are two Mikes, another Afton era character. Every now and again, a theory focused on Secret of the Mimic or Security Breach does surface. John FNAF actually did a fantastic one recently about the original lore of Security Breach. But the overwhelming majority of theories over the last year have focused on these older games. And I find this fascinating, given the amount of pure information.
Again, also the movies are like doing stuff for the old stuff, the old era, with like Afton and Charlie and all that, so we're kind of still re-examining things as we go.
In games like Security Breach, to the point where people are still finding new clues. Why aren't people diving deeper into that? When we had a game with as strong a story as Secret of the Mimic, why are theorists moving on so quickly?
Well, you know, like, it's in the middle of the story, so there's not as much to go on about.
When we have mysteries like Chica's secret freaking party, why are people talking about the old days? Well, dear theorists, I did a bit of a deep dive into this. And so now I'm going to take you on that journey, because the answers I found by reflecting on our theories and talking to other theorists in the space revealed some really interesting stuff about how the franchise has evolved over the years, what the state of FNAF is in 2026, and why theorizing has moved in the direction it has.
Let's hear, alright.
What is the main goal of FNAF theorizing? I'll give you a second to write them in the
Solve
comments.
the
and
story.
While you do, maybe you can just hit that subscribe button. All done? Great. As far as I and many other theorists are concerned, the main reason we theorize is to figure out the story.
Yeah.
From day one, the story of FNAF was cryptic, hidden,
Yep.
and vague. There's a reason our first video was using a real-life Chuck E. Cheese event as an allegory.
At some point, you're gonna have to be a bit more forward to be able to create more mystery, but yeah.
Because otherwise, there's not a huge amount to go off of. As time's gone on, more and more has been added to the story, but that doesn't mean the clues got less cryptic.
Well,
now,
this
there were
should
secret
look
minigames you
clear.
unlocked if you died, or punched random codes into wall tiles. Then, 12
Yeah.
years have gone by, and we still don't fully understand the story. But this is where the divide comes in. As I
Okay.
mentioned, FNAF is split into two halves, the Scott era and the Steel Wool era.
Sure,
Or, if you
I
want
mean-
to stick to in-universe names, the Afton era and the Mimic era. The
Sure.
Mimic era is still ongoing, but the Afton era, technically speaking, is over. Sure, the Mimic
Or has it? I got different thoughts that I might share at some point in the future.
era is still throwing stuff at us
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Afton's email to buy
Yeah.
Murray's costume Manor in Secret of the Mimic, or Vanessa being related to an Afton in some way, but as a whole, the
Seemingly.
Afton era is completely over. His story is wrapped up. We started with a man who killed 5 kids in a back
Possibly.
room and stuffed them into suits,
Maybe
and
not.
it ended with a man stuck in purgatory being forever tortured by the souls of one of his victims. It's a pretty clean and cathartic ending. However, even with the ending to, let's call it the A-plot, there was still plenty of mysteries to solve. Who was the vengeful spirit? What's the name of the crying child? What is in the box? But with Ultimate Custom Night, it felt like
yeah.
a final hurrah from Scott. It seemed like he was trying to actively wrap up the loose ends, which would mean that everything we needed
At
to
the
solve
time.
those unsolved mysteries were available to us.
Yeah.
We just needed to look harder. Yes, Scott
Most
might
likely,
come
yeah.
and add more context in future games, like I've said, but technically speaking, everything we need should be right here in these games.
Yeah.
This idea, I think, was solidified when we were fully introduced to the Mimic in recent games. Thanks to the idea that Glitch Trap may just be a corrupted AI Mimic program that was trained on Afton's data, it means that Afton is well
Or it could
and
be Afton
truly
himself.
gone from the story. His legacy would still have an impact on future events,
Yeah.
but his story is over. And that idea of a closed
Or is
loop
it?
where all the pieces are in place for us is incredibly appealing as theorists, because that would offer us a foundation in which to build up all future theories, rather than it just being this Jenga tower that will topple over if one piece of information changes. And with so many small details left unsolved, we all flood back to those old games to try and see if we can solidify our foundations before we then move forward, leading to an influx of theories about those unsolved mysteries.
That
It doesn't
makes
help
sense,
that the
yeah.
story we have solved from that era, at least on a basic level, just feels like a better story than the one we're getting now.
It depends. In terms of now, I don't hate what's going on now. The only thing I kind of dislike is the Mimic itself as a concept, as a character. But otherwise, I'm enjoying the story. I think it's like it fleshes out the world more to imagine what even the original story was in a fleshed form, I guess.
Now, the details and orders of events are still hotly debated, but
Yeah.
the story of the first few games is the story of a family that was met with tragedy after tragedy. The eldest son bullies the youngest son until one day he takes it too far and he gets chomped by one of the animatronics at their father's work. The daughter gets scooped by one of her father's creations. The father, either out of compassion or a
I still
desperate
have that
desire
kind
for
of
knowledge, commits
Edwin.
to putting the family back together, killing a bunch of kids and experimenting to see if their souls could live on and even be brought back. The eldest son also ends up scooped. However, he doesn't die and goes on to try and make amends for everything that he and his father did, eventually burning everything to the ground. Again, orders and specific details vary from theorist to theorist, but the core concept is really strong. Afton is a very compelling villain. He preys on children, so immediately our minds
That's
label
Michael,
him as the
but
most evil
sure.
kind of character. If you believe that he actually cared for his kids and his actions were out
Again,
of a
that's
misguided
Michael.
love, then he's even more compelling, as essentially he's a broken-hearted man who made a mistake and went mad as a result. Michael's arc of older brother bully to selfless hero is a fantastic arc, and after several games with him, it feels so good when he finally wins, ending the cycle in our minds and absolving him. Even David, the crying child, and Elizabeth are interesting characters to follow, one wanting nothing more than to make Daddy.
Hold on. All right. Sorry, I had to pause for a second. All right, let's get back into this.
Proud regardless of the evil because she just doesn't know any better, and one who is so broken and scared that other spirits have to come together to help him find peace. These characters are so interesting because we can connect with them on some level. We might have felt that feeling of loss, or being scared, or wanting to make up for past mistakes. Or it's just the fact that we like to see stories of humans triumphing over other humans that we deem as evil. The issue with the story we have now is there aren't really any humans in it. And the ones we do have, we know very little about, to the point where we don't even know if we can call them heroes. Gregory was evil. Then he wasn't. But maybe he still is. Other than killing a few therapists, we know.
I kind of like the idea that if he is actually evil, still, just like outside of the brainwashing or whatever.
Nothing about his life before or after security breach that makes us connect with him. Vanessa, we have some backstory for, but because it's so unclear if she's an Afton or just some random girl, it becomes hard to know how much emotional investment we should put into her. Cassie seems nice. She was a kid with no friends until Gregory came along. But what else? Her dad worked for Fazbear, and we think we play as him and help wanted to, but what's their relationship?
She's the most, like, currently... the most you can invest in as a character, I guess.
Don't know. And the main villain in all of this, an AI robot. They tried to give it a sympathetic backstory. It was just a child, and it got...
Yeah, like, the story's interesting. I like a lot of it, but I agree that I can't really sympathize with the Mimic itself, because it's, you know, an AI robot.
Beaten up by its dad and lost its legs. But at the end of the day, we just can't connect with a robot the same way we can with a human that was abused by their father, like we saw in the Afton arc. I'm not saying we can never relate to robots. Certain movies do really good jobs of this. It's just that FNAF ain't one of them. Now, Scott and Steelwool did try to fix this lack of tragic relatable human issue with Secret of the Mimic, introducing us to the Murray household. A wife who tragically dies in a fire, a son who dies in the loading bay of the factory, and a father so obsessed with his work, he neglected both of them until one day his own creation kills him. That is a compelling story. The problem is, in the modern part of the story, they're all dead now, at least from what we can tell. Which means while they did create the right kind of characters and backstories, we don't put too much value on them because they're not around to continue to affect the story like David and Elizabeth were. And so, creators are naturally more drawn to these older games because the characters, their stories, and motivations are just far more interesting to talk about. Did William care or not? Is the crying child actually the vengeful spirit and not so meek? Was William the drunk father?
The one thing I want to raise, though, is that it took a lot of time to get to that point, even with like the original Scott games, because first 3 games it was nothing like this. All right, 4th game slightly changed that. But with the books, you know, with the novels plus the last 3/4 games, that was when it was like it changed into that. I just want to say that. So even the modern games can, you know, transform themselves starting from Secret of the Mimic. So
father in Midnight Motorist, or was it someone else? All of these questions are far more interesting as they change our perspective on these characters and their actions. They flesh them out into 3D characters rather than archetypes, and there's plenty of information to pull from compared to the newer era characters who have so little to show us. Okay, I might be getting a little worked up over this. I'm just really passionate about this particular topic, but thankfully I can let off some steam with today's sponsor. But now let's get back to figuring out what's going on with FNAF. Of course, YouTube was always going to play a part in why YouTube was picked to talk about certain topics.
Was that the boy already 7?
FNAF has pretty much always performed well on YouTube. It's what really boosted this channel into the stratosphere and launched the careers of so many other FNAF theorists we know and love today. But in recent times, there is something else that has been performing well across the platform. Nostalgia. I'm sure you've seen it. Long video essays about old cartoons or video games from your childhood that you thought no one else knew about. As a personal example,
these
for me,
people
I
are growing
love
up.
Cat Icarus.
That's why.
His stuff is just great, but it relates perfectly to my nostalgia as I was a PlayStation kid. I know, rip. But when he comes out with a several hour-long video about a Rugrats game, it immediately gets recommended to me. Audiences love nostalgia. They love to remember the simpler times, and so YouTube gives some level of favor to these videos. Therefore, people talking about old FNAF fits the criteria way more.
Yeah,
people are nostalgic for the old days of FNAF.
It's not just that. A lot of people were only invested in the older FNAF and kind of dropped out of the modern stuff, and that's why whenever they do look for stuff, they end up just watching things that are about the older games, things that they can easily get back into, essentially.
They want you to read the book about the Mimic. I don't know about the Mimic. Why would they change FNAF? FNAF is FNAF.
You have to remember, FNAF is now 12 years old.
I mean,
but people
you no longer have to read about the Mimic anymore. You can just play the games now. It's fine.
FNAF has been a huge part of my adult life. It came out when I was 20, but for others, it was literally their childhood. Those who are now 20 started watching when they were 8. So regardless of what age you were at the time, this franchise, and specifically those older games, are nostalgic to you, reminding you of a simpler time where you would just sit and watch a deep-voiced man yell at a screen, or some insane trying to make connections about the story. And so YouTube is more than happy to recommend those videos to you, which also means that when creators make videos about nostalgic topics...
I mean, okay, I'll be honest, my algorithm doesn't recommend me like older videos that much, so I don't know.
Like old FNAF, they get recommended more and more. Suddenly, they can hire...
They're also performed way better than some of the modern stuff, at least over time. That's why partially it might, you know, boost some of the older ones.
Yeah, an editor or a thumbnail artist, or heck, maybe they can just finally take this YouTube thing full time. And so people want to make more videos about the topic because that's what's working in the YouTube zeitgeist right now. But this also ties into my next point, which is with that aging audience, there's another knock-on effect. The introduction of new theorists. Like I said, in 2014, you had people like Matt, Dorco, 8-Bit Ryan, Razbowski giving their thoughts on the fandom. Kids and young adults started to come up with their own theories. Maybe they shared it with their friends. Maybe they shared it with a few people online in comments or on Twitter or Reddit. But really, those theories were largely left in obscurity, just sitting in the back of their minds. Now, 12 years have passed. The younger people who were watching those videos and coming up with those pet theories have now grown up. And so, some of them decided, you know what, I'm going to share my own theories with the world. Combine that with the lack of new FNAF content, and we start to see new YouTubers pop up. In the drought after security breach...
Yeah, like people who didn't have a voice are not having a voice, therefore they're going to talk about stuff that they didn't have a voice for back then, and now they can talk about, I guess.
We saw the likes of John FNAF, Toast, ID's Fantasy, Hyperdroid, and a bunch more gain popularity for their fresh takes on the franchise. In the recent drought post-Secret of the Mimic, we've seen people like T-Dreads, Unwithered Truth, Gibby's Horror Homestead, She's Always Awkward, and again, many others. And in a few years, I'm...
Is that her name, or is it She's Always Nervous? I don't remember, but they might have messed up on that. I don't know.
Sure, we'll see even more. But what this means is all those theories that people came up with all those years ago now get to see the light of day. They want to share the stuff that's been bubbling away inside of them for years, because that was the stuff that made them fall in love with the franchise. It's not to say they hate the new stuff, they just haven't had as much time to ruminate on it. What theory do you think is going to be stronger? The one you've had a year to think about, or the one that you've had 10 years to think about?
Yeah, that makes sense.
With each new wave of theorists, we see a wave of old school theories because they've been sitting on them for so long and want to finally share their ideas. Finally, we get to, I think, the biggest reason that theorists everywhere prefer to talk about the older games. The new games are, if we're honest, a bit of a mess. And I mean that in a few different ways. To start,
it's mainly Security Breach, really, that was like that. I guess storytelling-wise, we barely did much because of Security Breach. That was supposed to be the biggest storytelling one, but we kind of had to like track back a little bit and fix some of the mess from Security Breach. That's partially it, but for the most part, it's not so bad. I feel like we just need time. That's it.
With let's talk about how Steel Wool does trailers. I hope you're ready for a bit of a rant. Recently, Steel Wool has been posting things that are quote-unquote not teasers. But come on, guys, they are definitely teasers. We even got the announcement of Security Breach.
I mean, I think they're not like teasers. They're like teasers. Or teasers for teasers, if that makes sense.
At the end of it.
Sure.
So naturally, when they phrase something like this, all us theorists want to take a closer look. The issue is,
maybe that's why they did that.
There's not really anything to look at. Some people have made videos on these teasers, talking about things like how the rings are the same color as the glam rock, so this is clearly from the Security Breach era. Or it's in a pool, so maybe it's a VR experience similar to what we see in the Drowning Tales story. That's kind of all we can say about it. Even in the final one, where they essentially announce.
Yeah, but still. It's better than nothing, I think.
Security Breach 2 by hiding a 2 inside of Vanny's eye. Great, we found out there's a new game coming, but anything about that game is kind of going to be speculative at best because these images don't actually tell us anything. Even with...
Again, still early, I think it's fine because I don't want them to rush. Again, I don't want them to make Security Breach 2, you know, Security Breach 2 in the sense of a mess.
The trailers they release, they're fine as trailers. They show off a bunch of cool moments, but for theorists, they leave a lot to be desired. Both Secret of the Mimic and Help Wanted 2 were just narrated by Fazbear's classic voice, saying how the job is bad, but you'll be okay, probably. There are Easter eggs like the Monty cutout or the Fazreg port, but these are more like pieces that we...
but that's kind of better because you don't want to like spoil and reveal your game too early because of the theorists. So it's like give them just enough to make them theorize, but not so much that they can actually predict the whole game and be unsurprised when it comes out. Especially for like the, you know, the regular people, then like they're just the consumers. If they watch somebody's prediction and it turns out to be true, then the game will be a lot less impactful if everything is true. So I kind of understand why they might not want to do too much. I mean, when you think about it, Scott didn't really do much about the lore with the trailers either, to be fair, for the most part.
Don't have any direction.
It's not that different.
We don't get any sense of where the story is going. Back in the day, we used to get a lot of teasers on Scott's website that were full of secret little mysteries.
I mean, you got ones that don't matter, like the shocking thing with like a sister location. That didn't really mean anything. A lot of those, I think sometimes Scott does do kind of big-ish teasers, but at the same time, sometimes the teasers are less important than it seems at the time, and I think that's kind of the case again here.
Either we up the brightness to reveal a phrase that we needed to solve,
I guess
or we'd be
that,
told that the game was cancelled due to gas leaks, only to up the brightness and reveal it was a news article about an in-universe location. We'd check the source code to reveal a conversation between Baby and the Fun Times, telling us that Baby got kicked out of Ennard. This was the stuff that got us excited. They felt like they were building the world and telling us things that we could connect to previous games and books to help us predict what might be happening next and explain more of that story. But now it just feels like we are literally getting teased.
That only started really, if you think about it, after Security Breach, sort of. Not quite, actually, more like Run Help Wanted 2 maybe. But again, it's the mess of Security Breach. They had to essentially fix things, and it takes time.
Are presented in a way that implies there's a mystery to be solved, but it also just feels so disconnected, like the main piece of the puzzle is being hidden until the actual game comes out, which means we can't really do anything with it. Sometimes I wonder if this goes back to Steel Wool and their Security Breach trailer. I'm sure we all remember this iconic trailer.
As far as I know, that was, like, according to at least John FNAF, you know, it seems most likely that this was by Scott, or at least, you know, he sort of directed the trailer, I guess you could say. I don't know.
We did a theory based on that trailer, like we do with most big trailers, trying to predict what it meant for the upcoming game and its story. Matt later said that Steelwool actually emailed him asking if he had a man on the inside feeding him information.
Oh, shit.
Woo! Looks like we got it right. And then none of that story appeared in the final game. Now, I'm not going to stand here and debate the whole did they change the story thing. That's being done to death. But what I wonder is if that instance of them giving us an actually very compelling trailer with us then supposedly getting it right meant that they're now afraid of giving us too much. If they give us too much to work with, we...
Again, John FNAF, most likely Scott trailer. Scott didn't seem to have communicated the story that much with Steelwool, meaning they themselves weren't necessarily that aware of the story. Therefore, I don't know. I don't think it was because of that.
Might all just figure out the game, which in their minds could end.
Although I think in some part, because I just said like they don't want to give out too much through trailers and teasers, which makes sense.
One of two ways. Either we guess the story, and then when the game comes out, we're disappointed because there's no surprises. Or we guess the story, but then the game changes, as game development often does. And so, once again, none of what they presented shows up in the game. And so, we're all mad that we didn't get what we thought we were getting. I'm not saying they need to give away everything in a trailer. Absolutely not. That's actually a big issue in Hollywood right now. What I'm saying is you can have a trailer or teaser that leaves a little story direction, which, if you're smart enough...
I think we're still early in the Security Breach 2 thing, so just them announcing it like that is fine, because I think we're not going to get anything about it for like maybe 4 to maybe even 5 or 6 months, I think. We're probably not going to get much about it until then. I think it's still relatively early. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something coming in the next few days. Scott has been super active lately, so I don't know.
To put together with other parts of the teasers and trailers or even the books and tell you the story. But for most people, it will just be completely missed. I get it. It's a tough situation to be in. But right now, it feels like they've gone too far in the other direction, so afraid to give us anything that we can actually work with.
I don't think
we
that's
end up
the
with
case,
these trolly nothing burger posts that, sure, some people might be able to make a quick 15-minute video on or discuss on a live stream, but it's a flash in the pan. It doesn't really fill the gap in the lack of content like old
I mean, like, Nightmare Bunny is just, oh, was it me, the bot of 87? It wasn't that much, alright? I think we're overblowing the issue a bit. I think we just need to have patience with FNAF now, especially now, because the turnaround was easy for Scott, because, you know, just fucking simple SPNG games for the most part, and, like, quick 3 to 4 hour max kind of games, you know, so...
teasers and trailers did, and so people moved back to solving the old FNAF mysteries because there's actually enough there to work with. Enough to make an actual theory rather than just pure speculation.
As of right now.
And here's the thing, that lack of direction for the story isn't just for the new teasers that are coming out. It's also been a problem that we've been feeling for the entirety of the Steelwool era. I've already spoken about how the older stories feel more compelling than the newer ones, especially when it comes to things like the villain. But it also feels more compelling to theorists because the game makes it very clear what mysteries we're trying to solve. Here is obvious villain Purple Guy, so we try and solve who he is. Here we learn about the 5 missing kids in the posters, so what happened to them? We're introduced to the crying child, and then in a book we're shown puzzles about solving a name, which makes us go, oh yeah, he doesn't have a name, does he? Those questions are presented pretty front and center, and so as a theorist community, we have direction on what we needed to focus on and solve. Since Security Breach, however, we felt a little bit rudderless. Again, look at how many Secret of the Mimic prediction theories we did before it came out.
There's still quite a bit, I think. It's just, like I said, I think we're just a lot slower in progress in setting things up because FNAF is that much bigger, it's that much just different. Overall scale, everything is different. We can't really do the Scott stuff like that, you know, so... We just gotta have patience as a fandom.
Did that because it was the only obvious mystery to solve. Security Breach is infamously a mess of environmental storytelling with a bunch of Easter eggs that mean nothing and details that make very little sense on their own or even when connected to other clues. The game is also so big that we are still discovering things to this day. Technically, this means there are a bunch of mysteries to solve. We just don't know which ones we're supposed to be focused on. And
I think, again, for the most part, that was Security Breach's fault because it was a big mess. That was it. The rest is relatively simple and easy, I think, for the most part. We just left a lot with Security Breach hanging, and we're starting to pick it up now with Security Breach too.
Which clues connect to one another and which are just separate mysteries. Are we supposed to be solving what happened to the missing kids? The only mention we get of them is one line from Gregory and a newspaper during the bad ending. Are we supposed to be solving what the Mimic is going to do next? We know it wanted to get Cassie into the basement to let it out, but other than being free, its motivations are a bit obscure. Are we supposed to figure out if Edwin is still alive? It sounded like he died, but in the books he didn't, so it could go either way.
To not confuse people, because I think I saw somebody being confused. Yeah, Edwin didn't die in the past, in the 70s, 80s, or whatever. He died during the Pizzaplex era, in the books, at least. So, I get it. It's like we're trying to figure out whether he'd be alive enough to last to the Pizzaplex in the games as well or not.
And how important are any of these things to the actual plot of these games? It is impossible to tell. And part of that is down to how Steelwool is telling the story in this era of games. In the Afton era, all the pieces were in place for us. We just had to work hard to put them together. From that, we might have a few interpretations of how they could fit, which would then help us solve the story and maybe predict the next game. Then a new game would come out with some extra info that would inform and clarify those details. However, in this new era, while we're still getting lots of little pieces of information that technically fit together, it's vague as to how. In the next game, we then get a massive piece of revelationary information that we could never have predicted that ties everything together. Like in Security Breach, there was...
we could have, I think, maybe kind of, because Edwin in the books was doing something similar, so we could have still been like, you know, Tales Games is false and dead, but it still was like a precursor to that, I guess.
Basically zero way to predict the Mimic existed and was the one in control. Hence, we made a whole theory about Mrs. Afton being in charge. It wasn't until Ruin that the Mimic was revealed, which then made us all go back.
To be fair, the Mimic was in the books or whatever, so after Security Breach and before Ruin, I believe, right? I think, yeah.
And start connecting the dots. Or the whole, are the books canon debate? There were signs that they weren't, but it was impossible to tell for sure without the release of Secret of the Mimic.
You can infer that they weren't, I think, because I never believed they were, so...
It's a small but important difference in approach. One has a bunch of pieces that can be put together beforehand and then gives you potential confirmation of your theory after the fact. The other has a bunch of pieces that don't really feel connected, only coming together when you have one specific piece which isn't revealed until the next game.
I mean... I don't know, with the original FNAF, it still adds like a bunch of random pieces that are like, oh, I guess we do something with that. I think there was a little bit with the storytelling that Scott was trying to do that was kind of like the modern era, not to the scale, but I think we just didn't realize it, probably.
This leaves theorists with a...
Shadow Bonnie, for example, I think could have potentially been a teaser for... Maybe not exactly a teaser, but like a foreshadowing, I guess, if you will, for Springtrap, for example. I feel like it was, at least at that time. I don't know if it is now or not or whatever, but yeah, like I think there was slight storytelling attempts like that was caught at the time.
Feeling of, what's the point? I know I've certainly felt that. Why bother trying to solve mysteries we do see, because we're clearly missing the key cornerstone to it, and we'll just
we could try to predict that, at least, you know, predict what is this key part, you know?
Get rug pulled when the next game comes out anyway. Theorizing is fun, and we sometimes just want to do thought experiments to see what would happen. But we also like trying to get things right. We do want to solve things. And if we can't do that before the next game, why should we try? It doesn't help that these games are now coming out super far apart. I've already talked about us being in a FNAF drought, but those are becoming way more common. The first 4 games all...
Yeah, like I said, the Scott was like fast, had fast turnaround, but that's because the games themselves are short and simple. The newer games a lot bigger, you know, it needs a lot better development and stuff. Like Scott's is just like PNGs and GIFs essentially. Meanwhile, Steelwool has to actually properly work on like the physics, the movement, and all that. It's a lot less of a click and point and click with the PNGs, you know.
Came out within 13 months.
And even with Scott's like games, there was like some little details that were kind of off within them if you look closely. So stuff that Steelwool shouldn't really do or isn't really doing for the most part. So
of each other. Sister Location was a little over a year later. Peter Rita Sim was a little over a year again. Ultimate Custom Night was just half a year. Help Wanted was just under a year. And then Security Breach.
Well, Help Wanted was being worked on since I think like Pizza Sim or something, like a decent while back. So still
2.5 years.
Yeah, that was a large game.
It was
though.
almost 2 years after that, although that was just DLC. Help Wanted 2 was 2 years after Security Breach, and Secret of the Mimic was a year and a half after that. I guess we technically had Into the Pit and FNAF AR in between some of those, but in terms of mainline games that we can 100% use for lore purposes, you can see how the gaps are just getting bigger than they used to be. Now, look, game development takes time.
Yes,
and I think for a lot of us, we'd rather Steelwool take more time on a game
Yeah, I agree.
that it looks good rather than just rushing it out the door.
Yeah.
But that does come with a consequence for the theorist community. When there's larger gaps between games, there becomes less and less to talk about over time. During the original run of games, Matt could barely get a theory out before Scott released the next game. This kept the conversation and theorizing going over a year. And then by the time those mysteries were solved, it was time for Sister Location. Not to mention there were a bunch of books to fill the gaps. But since Help Wanted, they've taken more and more time. And you combine that with what I've already said about there not being any clear direction in terms of which mysteries we should focus on, or the fact they're hiding key information from us, it means that after a couple of months, the games have been talked about as much as they can. And so we go back to the old games where new games might help us fill in those mysteries rather than just trying to solve new ones.
Sure.
Basically, I think this last year of FNAF theorizing has been the culmination of a number of things. The lack of new games, new theorists joining the platform, nostalgia being king, and the newer era just feeling a little bit lackluster compared to the OG run. That's not to say that things can't and won't change. We've got a bunch of new releases next year. Maybe Security Breach 2, whether it's just from better marketing or from the game itself, we'll end up seeing a shift back to people finally feeling like they can solve the new era of FNAF. Maybe the FNAF World 2 that got announced by Mega Cat Studios will be set within the older timeline of games to follow on from the original FNAF world in order to help put those mysteries to rest and force...
That was one thought I was actually having, is that FNAF World 2 might be the game that works on the old games, essentially, like the story and stuff.
...us to look forward at new ones, because that's all that will be left to solve. But
it might continue off the box mystery again, although I think Scott is just gonna leave that behind.
Hey, that's just a theory. A game theory!
Whoopee.
Thanks for watching.
Alright, so... I don't know. I'm not like 100% agreeing here. I feel like it's kind of overblowing some of the issues and a little late to it. I think if you said this around... Like, if you were talking about this between, like, Ruin until Secret of the Mimic, or even before this anniversary, maybe even, it would have hit more, but to me, one thing that I feel like the fandom should have, and theorists and everybody really within the scope of FNAF in general, should have more patience now, alright? Because people were, like, recently, people were, like, overly criticizing Steelwool and Scott and all that. Suddenly... when the anniversary came around, people pretty much changed back their opinions. Suddenly they're constantly praising. They're like, oh my god, whoa, this is so cool, and all that. My point is, you need some patience. You need to have an idea that things are in the works in the background. It just needs time and like proper time and place for things, essentially. We got the movies as well, which he didn't really mention, that are kind of filling in here and there. They help filling the older story and a little bit with the newer Vanessa and all that. But I think it's overblowing stuff, like with Cassie and Vanessa and all that. It's like we only got them once, right? Like Gregory only appeared in Security Breach. We had like brief mentions in existence of him in Ruin, but that's kind of part of Security Breach because it's a DLC. Vanessa maybe was related with Tape Girl and all that, but mainly is in Security Breach again. Not much about her in Help Wanted 2 or Secret of the Mimic, so point is, we need to have patience. We need to know that things are probably in the works, and I think Security Breach was the major catalyst for a lot of these issues, and it's just been a lot of work to essentially fix that over time. It still needed time. Scott being like suddenly a lot more active recently, I think, is part of it as well. He said in the interview with Dalko that he wants to like have a team more like for like PR and, you know, just like a public thing, and that was the purpose of the account on Twitter that he made for the 10th anniversary. But he, as far as I remember, he didn't say that he had it ready, more so that he was about to get it ready. And between working on the movie, games, and all that, Scott seems a little too busy to manage everything that fast. And so it needs time to be set up, essentially. And I agree that from a community, quote-unquote, standpoint, it's gonna be a little bit of a problem, because yeah, you're gonna like talk about it for like a few months and then you have nothing new to talk about and you go back to the old stuff. But I still need some patience. Sometimes you could also pace a lot of your theories and stuff to talk about. You're gonna need some time to, instead of like pumping everything fast, you can just pace it with like, here's a new theory on the new stuff, but then here's an old theory using the new stuff, and so on. That way you can slightly drag it out a bit more. But that's just one thing. That's just like a suggestion. Maybe it'll still dry up. But my point, overall, I feel like this video didn't need to happen at this point. They could have worked earlier than the anniversary, before the announcements. That's all I gotta say, I think. So it's just, you know, have patience. Things need time. That's all I can say. But I don't know. Maybe you disagree with me, maybe not. I'm like, you know, I see the point. I slightly agree, but for the most part, I think it's just, I don't know, unnecessary. It feels too complainy at a point where it's not really time to complain. Like it's fine to voice your hopes for these things, but clearly, since they are working on things and trying to fix a lot of the issues that they have, it's more so like, you know, just, you know, oh, I hope they get all this like that and all blah blah blah, but stop like voicing it as complaints and here's the issue and all that. I think that kind of hinders the franchise and makes it a lot more negative seeming than it actually is. Generally, I don't know. Maybe it should be faster, but I think people need to have patience, and I keep repeating that. But yeah, that's because they do. So I don't know. Fucking leave a like or whatever. See ya, pals.